Hello students, welcome to today's session. In this session, we are going to explore the concept of sensor motor interaction and error argumentation. So basically these are the two main key elements that play very significant role in motor control and rehabilitation. So let's start uh, with the concept of error argumentation. So error argumentation actually is a powerful tool, or we can say a powerful method in motor rehabilitation and sensorimotor training. So actually after a brain injury, let's say as a stroke or maybe the where the usual neural pathways that control the movements may be disrupted. So that means that the signal that used to control our muscles before the injury may be no longer be effective. So as a result, what happened? The brain must learn new signal pattern to control that movement using, let's say, whatever the neural resources are remains or still intact. So this process of relearning motor skills shares similarities with the learning in other domains like sports, surgery, music, or maybe child development. So one very key insight from the neuroscience is that the brain is highly plastic. It can reorganize and adapt through the training and the experience. So that error argumentation actually uses this plasticity nature of the brain. So instead of trying to hide or minimize the error during the training, we intentionally amplify the error and show it to the subject. So this might sound little strange, maybe uh, at first sight, but why would we want to show the mistakes to the patient? So the idea is to draw attention to the error. So the whole idea of this error argumentation is to draw the attention of the subject or the patient to the error so that the brain is more actively engaged in correcting and adapting. So we can take example, let's say, imagine a patient reaching for a cup. So it may be a very simple task for us, but it is very hard for someone with motor impairment. And why it is? Because it involves various non-linear, let's say, arm dynamics, then feedback delays between muscle movement and brain processing, and slow muscle activation. So to move accurately, the brain must rely on an internal model, a kind of mental simulation or prediction of what will happen when we move, for example. So, but after the injury, this internal model may be broken or may be outdated. So many studies shows that when it distorts sensory feedback, say by applying a force to the hand or adding weight, people initially make large errors, but with practice they adapt. They may first like their muscles may be very stiff and those muscles will resist the unfamiliar forces, but over time they learn to move smoothly. And one more thing that is very interesting that they learn to move smoothly again and well coordinated way. So when the force is suddenly removed, the person often overshoot or mismatch with the uh, uh, target, and that is called the after effect. And it's showing that the brain has learned and updated the internal model. And importantly, much of this learning happens implicitly without conscious awareness. So this makes error argumentation as a powerful tool for the rehabilitation. It can guide the nervous system to learn and correct movements through experience rather than explicit instruction. So that means, in a nutshell, the error argumentation is making errors, especially with the amplified ones, and it can help the brain to learn in a more better way and in a more faster way. So let's understand about how sensoromotor interaction forms the foundation for the error argumentation strategies in rehabilitation. So in our daily moments or daily life movement, the brain constantly receives sensory information from the environment. through vision, touch, uh, proprioception, and other senses. So this information helps the brain to plan, coordinate, and execute motor action very effectively. But however, during any motor task, error can and that may occur. So these error might be due to incorrect movement paths or trajectories, poor timing, inadequate or excessive force applied, and maybe instead of simply trying to eliminate these errors, we can use them as an advantage. So this is where the concept of error augmentation comes and play a role. So the core idea behind error augmentation is intentionally amplifying or distort these motor errors during the training. By doing so, we can enhance the brain's sensitivity to mistakes, making it more responsive to learning and adaptation. So these perturbations or distortions in feedback can be introduced in various ways. For example, through virtual reality environment, in robotic system, in modified sensory setups. So let's say in virtual reality environment that manipulate what the user sees or experience. Similarly, in robotic system, we can use some external forces or unexpected forces or the resistances. In modified sensory setups, we give a delayed feedback or maybe amplified or redirected feedback. So these deliberated manipulation of the feedback helps the nervous system to recalibrate and build a more accurate learning model for the future movements. Now, if you see the process of error augmentation, how it actually works as a structured learning framework in rehabilitation. So this process typically follows four key stages: motor task execution, error magnification, modified feedback, and error-based learning. So the first one, individual, let's say the motor task execution. So the patient or the individual begins by performing the motor task. During this activity, their performance is closely monitored and any deviation or error from the desired movement path or outcome are detected in real time. For that, we can use variety of sensors. Then error magnification. So the next step, these detects the error and amplify it or exaggerate the error deliberately. So let's say for example, if a person's hand deviates slightly from the correct movement trajectory, the system may magnify that deviation, making it such more noticeable to the user. Then the third step in this process is modified feedback. So these augmented error are then sent back to the person using different sensory modalities such as visual cues on the screen, auditory alerts, or maybe haptic feedback from a robotic device. So this modified feedback gives the individual a clear and exaggerated sense of how far their current movement is from the desired one. Then the fourth step is error-based learning. So with this enhanced awareness about the error, the brain responded by trying to correct these amplified errors. Through repeated practice and exposure, the nervous system begins to adapt and refine the motor control strategies and gradually reducing the error over time. So this process leads to improved motor performance even after the exaggeration is removed. So this strategy is especially powerful in neurorehabilitation because it encourages the nervous system to recalibrate itself. And an essential step is in this particular process. Now, there is one very important foundation of the neurorehabilitation, that is neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity, maybe we are very much familiar with this. So neuroplasticity refers to the brain's inherent ability to reorganize itself, both in terms of structures and the functions. So in response to whatever the experience, learning, or injury we are having. So in context of motor control and rehabilitation, neuroplasticity plays a central role in learning new motor skills, in adapting those skills to new or altered environments, and recovering lost motor functions after a neurological injury like strokes. So let's say, for example, when a person is exposed to visual or mechanical distortions like altered visual feedback or robotic force perturbations, the neuroplastic mechanism get activated, and these help the brain to modify the existing movement pattern or motor plan, or even it can help the subject to develop new plan motor pattern also. So this means the nervous system is capable of rewiring its neural connection, strengthening useful pathways, and forming entirely new circuits when needed. So a classical example in the rehabilitation is that after stroke. So let's say if someone is having hemiparesis, that means partial weakness on one side of the body. So with repetitive task-specific practice during therapy, their brain start to adapt, even though some brain areas may be damaged. So other areas can take over, and that is just because of the neuroplasticity. And this is called the functional improvement over time. So neuroplasticity give us, let's say, a hope, and also it's a powerful tool for motor recovery in neurorehabilitation. So neuroplasticity can be of two types. The first form of neuroplasticity is structural neuroplasticity. The other form is functional neuroplasticity. So the structural neuroplasticity actually refers to the physical changes in the brain structure. So we can take an example like learning a new motor skill, or maybe like playing the piano or learning to walk after the injury. So with consistent practice, the brain forms new synapses, and the existing connections of the neurons will be more stronger, that is there between the neurons. So this kind of plasticity supports long-term memory and motor skill acquisition. Whereas on the other hand, the functional neuroplasticity involves changes in the brain's activity pattern. So, for example, when someone loses their vision, the brain does not let the part of the cortex go to waste. Instead of that, it reorganizes itself, reallocating that neural real estate to support other senses like touch or maybe the hearing. So, this reallocation of the function shows how flexible the brain can be when responding to injury or sensory losses. So if we keep these two plasticity together, we can say that it allows the brain to continuously adapt, learn, and recover throughout the life. And that is actually the main key concept of neurorehabilitation. So, in this neurorehabilitation, there is one more important concept that is called crutch effect. So, the crutch effect happens when individual becomes overly dependent on external aids or guidance while performing motor tasks. So, this coupled with physical support, visual cues, real-time feedback from the device, or maybe from the therapist. So we can take example like imagine a person learning to walk again after a stroke. If they constantly use the walker, they may begin to rely too much on that walker on it for the balance and the coordination. So over time, this reliance prevent the nervous system from learning to regain control independently. So which can actually resist the true recovery and slow down the progress. So while external support is helpful, especially early in rehabilitation, it's very crucial to gradually withdraw or reduce the assistance. So this helps and promote autonomous motor control, encouraging the brain and the body to adapt and self-correct and ultimately learn. So in therapy and learning, the balance between support and challenges is one of the key to preventing the crutch effect and uh, making the subject independent for motor learning and the skill acquisition. There is another term that is actually very much important for this motor learning guidance. So the two terms are guidance and the anti-guidance. So let's understand the difference between guidance and the anti-guidance in context of motor learning and the rehabilitation. So basically, guidance refers to providing external support, cues, or assistance to help individual in performing motor tasks correctly. So it is especially very useful in early stage of learning. where individuals are unfamiliar with the task. Guidance actually help them to understand and correct movement and build initial confidence. However, if we continue to provide too much guidance for long time, it can resist the or it can actually oppose the development of independent motor control. So this is very much similar to the clutch effect. So the other one is anti-guidance. So uh, in coordination with the guidance, this is what the anti-guidance have a role to play. So anti-guidance actually involves gradually withdrawing support, encouraging individual to use their own internal mechanisms such as proprioception, error correction, and cognitive strategies to perform the task. So this promotes self-regulation, autonomy, and long-term motor skills retention. So we can discuss this with an example. So let's imagine a beginner golfer learning how to swing the club. So in the guidance phase, the coach provides detailed instruction, corrects the posture, and gives the real-time feedback on each swing. So this helps the golfer to understand how the movement should feel and look. As the golfer gains the experience, the coach begins to reduce verbal cues and physical correction. This is the anti-guidance approach. Now the golfer has to adjust their own posture, analyze their swing, and self-correct based on the feedback from the ball trajectory and feel of the movement. So this gradual transition actually enhances the motor training because the individual is actively engaged in the learning process, not passively just following the instruction. So the same principle applies in the neurorehabilitation, where initially guided guide is provided to the patients through exercise, but over the time we reduce the help so that they can rebuild independent control using their own sensory and motor system. So now one of the very key question is, does actually more errors leads to more learning? So maybe in first glance, it might seem logical to think that more errors means more opportunities to learn. But the relationship between the error and the learning actually very much complex. So some amount of error is actually necessary for learning to take place. But errors signal that something is not working as expected, which promotes the brain to make adjustments and adaptations. However, if error is too large or too frequent, it can actually be uh, discourage or maybe counterproductive. So large error can confuse or discourage the learner also and may overwhelm the brain's ability to correct and adapt the adapt efficiently. So the key is to find the right amount of error, not too small or not too much. If the error is very small, the brain can ignore that error. Or if error is very high or very large, then it causes the frustration or the confusion. So factors basically that influence the balance, those can be the task complexity, the individual skill level, timing and frequency of the error feedback. So, task complexity, for example, simple tasks can tolerate large errors, but complex tasks may need smaller and more manageable error signals. The individual skill level, how it contribute. So beginners might benefit from the smaller error, while advanced learner may benefit from the slightly larger error or more challenging errors. And same as the timing and the frequency in error feedback. So continuous high frequency errors may not be very helpful unless balanced and adequately providing the processing time. So, if we take any example, let's say in a study comparing of two groups learning a new dance routine. So, one group experienced slightly higher error rates during the training, while the other group had very few errors. So, the results are very interesting. The group with moderate errors showed greater improvement over time. This suggested that the moderate level of challenges enough that will be enough to activate the correction mechanism, but not enough to cause failure, leads to better learning outcome. So in rehabilitation and training, it's important to design tasks that allow some degree of errors, especially during the learning phase, but avoid overwhelming the learner. So now let's talk about the key concept in the successful application of error augmentation therapy, and that is actually making the therapy functionally relevant. So error augmentation can be powerful tool to improve motor learning. However, if the training tasks are too abstract or disconnected from the real life activities, the skills learned might not transfer um, to everyday function. So how do we avoid this? We make a training task mimic real world activities as closely as possible. This includes not just the movement themselves, but also the environment, context, and even the emotional or motivational aspect related or tied to those tasks. So, for example, let's consider a therapy session for a person with a spinal cord injury. So, instead of practicing random reaching motions, the therapist designed the error augmentation experience that simulate daily life scenario, like reaching forward to grab a glass of water or water bottle on the shelf, using the body to transfer from wheelchair to a bed, adjusting, let's say, arm movements while dressing or cooking by integrating functionally relevant movements. So the therapy doesn't just build uh, strength or coordination, it builds confidence and skill in the task that actually matter in the person's day-to-day life. So this approach also enhances general ability. So meaning the movement in the motor performance are not just limited to the clinic or the lab, but can actually carry over the person's home, workplace, or maybe the social life. So now let's see the important question that why does error augmentation actually works? So error augmentation based on a simple yet powerful idea that when we make errors more visible or noticeable, the brain receives a stronger and clearer signal that something is wrong. And this drives it to adapt and learn. So when a person performs a motor task and makes a small mistakes, that error might not be large enough for the nervous system to to recognize or to respond it effectively. But when we amplify the error, say make the deviation bigger or the feedback more prominent or pronounced, so the brain is forced to pay attention and more importantly to correct it. So this process enhances error detection, problem solving, and activates neuroplastic changes and helping the brain to refine its motor commands and improve performance. So we can take, let's say, one example. Let's imagine a person recovering from a stroke who is practicing reaching movement. So if they tend to continuously undershoot the target by a small amount, the therapist can use the robotic arm or a virtual reality system to exaggerate or to amplify that error visually, making it seems like their hand is missing the target by a lot more than it is missing. So now because of the error looks bigger, the person becomes more aware of it. Their brain engage more effectively in trying to solve the problem, adjusting the reach, refining the angle, or modifying the error. So over time, this repeated effort to correct modified or amplified error leads to better control and stronger motor learning. So in this session, we have discussed about the error augmentation and how it can be helpful for motor learning and neurorehabilitation. So thank you all for your attention.